Hey, Flipgrid family, it is Yaritza. I am welcoming you to the third episode of Ask Yaritza. I have a special guest today, Amber Coleman-Mortley.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amber Coleman-Mortley. I'm the Director of Social Engagement at iCivics. We make video games and civic content. I'm also a mom blogger and a podcaster with my daughters at Let's K-12 Better. Thank you, Yaritza.
I am so happy to be here today for two reasons. One is to actually answer your questions, but the next is because I get to speak about Indigenous Peoples Day with Amber. What you guys don't know is that I speak to Amber almost every day. So this is not a new conversation. It's just us bringing it into your homes. So let's actually start with today's question. So this was asked from one of our viewers, and they wanted to know, how should they balance the responsibility of addressing trauma from news and political stories versus risking losing their jobs? I believe this is a very important topic, especially with so much that's happening in the media today. So I'll actually start with you, Amber, before I begin.
Yeah, of course. Obviously, we want to make sure that we establish with our students a bit of trust. No matter what topic we go into, no matter what the trauma, whether it's issues of, immigration or the election or, racial justice or equity issues, right? We want to make sure that we have established with our students a trust and an openness where they see our classroom as a safe space, where they can come to you as a resource. That takes time and work. And I know that that's challenging in the digital space. But also it's super rewarding when your students believe that they can come to you and speak on these topics. So trust is the first thing. The second thing is, understanding that when we elevate student voice, those voices have their own opinion. They have autonomy. We want to make sure that we're respecting that. We want to facilitate the space where they feel respected and can use their voice. And I know that the struggle is real, where we're trying to make sure that we grant students that space, but then also we want to not lose our jobs. So, discussing controversial issues can be tough. And I don't call them controversial issues. I call them issues of survival. So I'm going to flip that around a bit. And then also just say, communicate with the other adults. So speak with your admins, let them know, hey, my students are dealing with these issues. We really want to talk about it. What's the school policy on that, right? Bring your admin in on it as a collaborator for facilitating space for student voice. The other thing is communicating with parents. Parents can be a bit intense and scary at times. I used to be a teacher, so I felt that in moments. You want to bring parents in either at the beginning of the school year and have a discussion about, hey, we're going to talk about these topics, or as you discuss these topics, let them know ahead of time, and then maybe even send home questions for parents to engage with their child after your discussion is over. So those are a few things that I would say hopefully are helpful.
You took my responses. Just kidding.
Great mind.
Of course. But I would also add, be an advocate for your students, right? So if you know that something isn't right, and there's so many things that's happening around us today that a lot of people are afraid of, not only addressing it with our supervisors, but also bringing it to the attention of our students. Be mindful that the media plays a lot of games with our students' opinions. And so if we're not the ones setting it straight, or we're not the ones actually presenting both sides of the issue, then who else is going to do it, right? And so what I would say is be an advocate, stand up for what's right, because if we don't do it, students notice when we don't speak up for them. And so when we fail to do it, it's almost like, well, Ms. V didn't say it, or Ms. Morley didn't say it, so therefore I shouldn't really talk about it. And this brings me into the topic of the proclamation on Columbus Day that our president, Trump, signed 3 days ago. He signed this, and it basically just stated that we will forever now see Columbus Day as October 12th. So obviously, you guys, especially if you follow me, this is a huge issue. If you follow Amber, this is a huge issue. But I'm bringing it up because what does this mean for our students? Our students now know that this is an official holiday. Before us even going live, we were having a discussion of, today I had today off. And I made a joke and I said, well, if we change it into Indigenous Peoples Day, would they still give me this day off? You know, so it's almost like just acknowledging the truths that are around us, but also knowing that it's going to actually hinder almost everything that we told our students about the reality of Columbus. What are your thoughts on it, Amber?
Yeah, so and sorry, there's beeping in the background because my kids. So, my thoughts on this are we want to focus on people and not, we want to focus on policies and not people, right? So I said that backwards.
Right. And if we look at policy, right? If we look at the fact that Trump signed this over 3 days ago, then we also have to acknowledge the events that happened in Portland yesterday. So not only did Trump sign his proclamation on October 9th, but yesterday in Portland, they knocked down statues of Roosevelt and Lincoln, and they called it the Day of Rage for the Indigenous Peoples Day. And the idea behind that is they've had enough of a government or a system that is not for its people. And so when we go back to thinking about being advocates for our students, building trust with our families, working hand in hand with not only our supervisors, but our colleagues, this is exactly the time that it needs to happen. So,
Yeah,
Amber, I know you got cut off.
again, like, yes.
I think Amber's Wi-Fi just like mine was last week, so we're gonna keep going. So just even going back to the question of balancing the responsibility of addressing trauma from the news and the political stories and maintaining your job. Remember, is that it's also your job to make sure that our kids are safe, but our kids know exactly what's going on around them. You want your students to be able to stand up and to speak up to everything that is happening, not only in their communities, but like Amber said, even in policy, because the policies that is being made today is going to impact our students now and in the long run. So
Yeah,
I actually,
and sorry about the glitchy internet. But I would say, oh, I hope I'm still on. That,
yes.
Everything Yaritza said, yes, yes, yes. iCivics has resources for teaching controversial issues, so I definitely suggest checking those out to help you kind of navigate a little bit about how do I bring these teaching both sides of the story, right? My daughter's teacher today taught both sides, like the Columbus side and the Indigenous people side. And I was kind of lurking in the background, just listening. And I was just extremely impressed with how she created the space for 9-year-olds to have such a sophisticated discussion on why do we need.
And I'm so glad that Amber brought that up. So the ADL actually created an activity, and it's called Columbus or Indigenous Peoples Day. And it asks students to think about what about Columbus that they learned in textbooks, but also what are some states that have now renamed Columbus Day Indigenous Peoples Day. And so you have it where teachers are doing the work, but then we have these, political figures like Trump, who's saying, no, let's take back everything that we've uncovered about the reality of Columbus Day and why we shouldn't celebrate it. Then let's go back to now officially making it a holiday that people are supposed to acknowledge this man who not only lied about discovering land where people were already here, but has done so in a way where he colonized people, And so it's just like, our kids need to know the reality, and that way they can make connections with why we are the way we are today, why there's systems in place that keep preventing us from moving forward as people of color.
Yeah, and I would say no matter what we call the day, it doesn't mean that we don't acknowledge everyone involved in that story. So even if it's still called Columbus Day, or even if in the future they switch it to Indigenous Peoples Day, we have a responsibility as history teachers, social studies teachers, just educators in general, to make sure that we are bringing a complete, full factual narrative to the table. So if you're only bringing one history into the discussion or one side of the story into the discussion, you're doing a grave disservice to your students, no matter what the day is called. So I do want to bring that up. Like, even if the day is Columbus Day, you still need to bring in the story of the Indigenous people who experienced the atrocities that they experienced to get us to this moment right here today.
Amber, I so agree. And I think that an easy way that we can do that as educators is by posing questions, right? So instead of just giving students just the facts from one perspective, pose a question and allow them to become the experts, because you'll see that they may uncover something that we probably don't even know. I know every day is a learning experience for me. I may learn from Twitter. I may learn from DMing Amber all day. I may learn from reading books that I probably would have never read before. But the idea is that I'm always trying to be a student first and always trying to investigate to see if someone's story is actually correct, or if I may need to support it a little bit more. So I think it's up to us as students first, because we are students before educators, to figure out what's the truth, but both sides of the story, both perspective, right? Through a clear and critical lens.
Right. Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
So if you had any piece of advice to give our viewers, I know we soon have to vote. Some folks are already out there voting. What would be your piece of advice?
Oh man. So you, the adult voting, if there are young people in your lives, right? Imparting the importance of going to the polls, right? That's the first thing I would give a bit of advice. And then secondly, becoming an informed voter, right? So we want to make sure that we're not just showing up to the polls. We actually in our mind have, who we're voting for and why. We've read up on the policies and how they impact us. And then we're making sound decisions based on that, right? So that is my biggest piece of advice. Show up, read up, and like, let's have an election glow up. I know that all rhymes is corny, but like, for real, like, don't just go, like, make sure you know before you go. So that's my advice.
So I love your advice, but before we log off, I'm actually looking at the comments, and one of our viewers, she said something and it was brought up to our attention, so I wanted to share with you. She was told not to discuss the 2016 election by admin the day after Trump won. And many of her students were terrified that they will be deported. So this is something that's still happening today. I know a lot of people, and maybe it's wrong for me to say this. I know a lot of illegal immigrants, right? I just became a citizen, I want to say 5 years ago. I wasn't here illegally, but I still have illegal immigrant friends. And honestly, a lot of those friends were afraid when Trump became president, and they still are afraid today. And they're more afraid for their kids who are U.S. citizens. So could you imagine just having parents who are illegal and you're here in the system and you don't know what the next step is? This is why it's important for those of us who have the opportunity to vote, right? And so Amber said something that was very clear. Go to the polls. Go to the polls. Show up.
And don't be afraid to support your students, right? I think there's a growing trend right now where a lot of educators are being told not to teach the election out of fear. I want to say, any parents listening, we need to make the job of educators a lot easier. We need to allow the space for critical thinking around the election and around issues that are impacted because of the election, supporting our teachers and having these discussions and not believing that we're indoctrinating kids when we send them to school remotely or in person. I would say that PTAs need to step up and support educators in having these important discussions, because ultimately they're human-centered discussions. Every choice we make is going to impact somebody in our community. And we need to be informed on those issues. We need to have conversations about those issues. And we need to figure out how we support everyone in our community, in our school community.
Thank you so much, Amber. Guys, we are running out of time, but I would love to tell you guys, make sure that you keep putting in those questions. Amber might be the special guest next week again, because it seems like we have a lot more to actually speak about. Thank you so much. Have a great night, guys. Bye.